This Artificial Intelligence and Equality podcast is hosted by Carnegie Council Senior Fellow Anja Kaspersen. Together with Wendell Wallach and an international advisory board, they direct the Carnegie Artificial Intelligence and Equality Initiative, AIEI, which seeks to understand the innumerable ways in which AI impacts equality and international affairs. This episode features Pascale Fung. It was recorded on February 18th, 2022.
Today, I'm very pleased to be joined by Pascale Fung. Pascale is a professor in the Department of Electronic and Computer Engineering and Department of Computer Science and Engineering at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. She's known globally for her pioneering work on conversational AI, computational linguistics, and was one of the earliest proponents of statistical and machine learning approaches for natural language processing. She's now leading groundbreaking research on how to build intelligent systems that can understand and empathize with humans. A huge welcome to you, Pascale. I've really been looking forward to this conversation with you. Your professional accolades are many, most of which we'll touch on during our conversation. However, for our listeners to get to know you a bit better, I would like us to go back to your upgrowing during what I understand to be a very tenuous political period in China.
Yes, indeed. I was born and grew up, spent my childhood in Shanghai, in China. And I think I was interested in magic when I was a little child. And one day I got a book from my father, I think. He showed me the book about the physics behind magic and made me realize there was an explanation of everything magical. And that was really fascinating. So it was the first time I think I encountered physics, and I was very interested in all kinds of encyclopedia and so on. And then around the age of 7 or 8, I read a book. It's a science fiction book about the future where robots will be helping us, and there will be no longer flu, and then we will be shopping from home. That I remember that was like it was very eye-opening, and I was so inspired. I decided I could not wait for this future to come, and that I wanted to build robots. That was the beginning of my interest in robots and later on artificial intelligence and the technology that's associated with this, which is computer science. Yeah, and these three things we see today is it's pretty interesting that we do spend a lot of time online from home, shopping and otherwise. And we do have robots now, but we still have flu and more than that, right? In the last 2 years, we have seen that humanity still has not quite conquered the so-called flu.
And I learned in earlier conversations that we had, Pascale, that you were quite competitive academically, and in some ways always motivated to break new ground.
So my parents are both artists, and they had very open spirit. For Chinese parents, that's quite something, because they did not actually tell me what I should be doing, and they often just gave me books to read, or if I had a question, they would say, you can explore the answers. So they gave me a lot of science books and encyclopedia and those kind of books. And when I was, when I was a child, I was around 8 or 9, I overheard a conversation between my uncle, who was an engineer, and my mother, who was an artist. And this was a conversation he was telling her that I was a brilliant little girl, and I was doing very well in school in every subject, but never would I ever be as good as the boys in mathematics. And that caught my attention. I'm like, I was like, why would that be so difficult? And then I took a more acute interest. I was interested in everything, but then I took a more acute interest in mathematics and joined the mathematics club and math Olympiad competition and so on. And I discovered that I actually quite like mathematics, and I was quite good at it. And so that was the first time. And along the way, as I grow up, obviously as a woman who then, when I wanted to do engineering college, I remember my male cousins told my father not to waste money on a daughter to go to college and support me to do engineering. And my father was furious about this kind of comments. And he's like, we will support you fully, no matter what. And later on, when I want to do PhD, again, very friendly advice from friends of my mother saying, for a girl to do PhD, she's gonna age so early, so soon. She's never gonna be able to find a husband. So all these things, but all these comments just kind of made me want to pursue my dream even more. I just wanted to prove people wrong, that it was not impossible for me to do these things. And of course, as a child of two artists, when I told people I wanted to build robots, I wanted to do engineering, I was met with a lot of disbelief, let's say. And but all those kind of naysaying just became fuel to my motivation, right? To realize my dream, to pursue my dream. And here I am today. I feel very privileged to have had all these opportunities to do a PhD with brilliant people in the US. I went to Bell Labs, which was my dream as a teenager, and worked with some of the most illustrious researchers in computer science and electrical engineering at Bell Labs. So, and since then, I've just had the very good fortune to always continue to pursue what I wanted to pursue since a child. And then around maybe less than a decade ago, the field of artificial intelligence actually exploded. And things that I could only dream of making happen actually happen. The performance of conversational AI systems is approaching human level fluency. And we do indeed have robots now. I'm collaborating with robotic companies to make robots in shopping malls as a receptionist, synthetic humans who can talk to you and again, become your companion or a receptionist. And last but not the least, robots and virtual assistants that help elderly and people who need help for their mental health. And recently, well, this last year, we actually built a system, a virtual, we call it the virtual quarantine companion, in light of the fact that so many people coming back to Hong Kong had to stay in quarantine for 2 weeks in a hotel room. People going to China had to do that. And I went through that myself 2 summers ago. So we built this virtual companion for people in quarantine and to talk to them, to guide them through some, daily exercise, meditation, to chat with them and gauge their mental well-being, their emotional state, and help them basically to self-care. We also collaborated with EIOS, WHO, to provide a question answering engine for experts to ask questions related to COVID and vaccine research. And that was very important, 2 years ago, and we play a small part, as many and many other researchers in AI, to help with the research on vaccine. So I feel very fortunate to have the opportunity to do this kind of work.
You are known for your work on linguistic models and machine learning. And to demonstrate your passion for languages, I actually learned that you speak 7 languages yourself fluently, which is an impressive feat. I would like to ask you to explain to our listeners, or rather clarify, what your work entails and maybe add some historical context. What is conversational AI? What are its applications? Why and how does linguistics play into our ability to recognize human emotions and sentiments, especially, I would imagine, more complex emotions such as humor and sarcasm or irony and even deception?
So the history of conversational AI, I would say in AI started maybe in the 1960s with the first expert system rule-based chatbot called ELIZA. So many computer science students, our first homework assignment in AI class is usually to write a rule-based ELIZA that basically talks and checks with people as you type. And it's very simple kind of chatbot. And later on, the history, I would say different milestones happened. I remember I got into the field of conversational AI by way of speech processing in 1988. At the time, we were doing speech recognition of phonemes only, like very, very elementary kind of speech recognition. In the late 80s and early 90s, I participated in programs that were funded by DARPA, and the DoD in the United States. And I worked for a company called BBN System Technologies, and we built systems that allow fighter pilots to use voice command to use the weapon while they fly the planes. But at the time, we were not very acutely aware of any ethical implication because it just seemed very, very elementary, right? Very basic kind of application. And it was just not very, it did not feel very real and impactful what we did. And then DARPA continued to fund the project. I think the first generation of DARPA funded conversational AI project was called Communicator. And different groups from BBN, from AT&T Bell Labs at the time, and some other universities got the grant to work on pushing the envelope of conversational AI. And I think the first prototype was a system that will book train tickets for you when you call in. So it will ask you about how many passengers, what's the origin, what's the destination, and so on as you speak. So that was in the early 90s and late 90s, we saw actually the first generation of commercial conversational AI systems. I don't know if the listeners remember, we had IBM Via Voice, which was the first commercial speech recognition transcription software that you can use on computers. And then late 90s, I think it was around 98 and 99, there were two companies, Nuance and Speechworks, that commercialized conversational AI for call centers. If your listeners remember, in the late 90s, any helpline you call, you will be answered by computer voice, asking you, how it can help you and so on. And I remember there was even SNL skits like making fun of computer agents, right, at the time, because the computer voice was not very natural. But it did a lot of the jobs of a call center since the late 90s. And then moving on, so I participated in that generation of conversational engines. I actually worked on a startup that worked with China Telecom in the early 2000s, late 90s to use computer conversational AI for call center services. It proved to be too early for China at the time. But then the technology kept improving. People working on research in conversational AI kept working on it. Another milestone came about, I think, around the time IBM Watson participated in Jeopardy and beat the human champions. And there was a lot of question answering in that system with a computer voice. So that's a different generation of conversational system that had actually ability to compete, to play a game, to strategize, and to answer questions. And to actually, in Jeopardy, was rather formulating a question given an answer. So that was a huge milestone in the area of conversational AI when IBM Watson beat human champion. And it took them, I think, only 5 years to reach that goal in winning IBM. And after that, another milestone came, was Apple Siri. I think it was iPhone 4. when they first launched the voice assistant Siri in the smartphone. And that's when conversational AI became pervasive. Since then, every smartphone has a voice assistant. It's become commonplace. And again, more recently after that, came the generation of smart speakers, right? That had conversational agents and conversational AI helping you, answering your question, doing shopping for you, and so on. So this is conversational AI. And we continue to make these systems more empathetic. So that's one of our main focus since a few years ago, which is to make these conversation agents understand not only what you say, but how you say it. Because human-to-human communications is based on not just the content of what we say, but also the emotion. You will convey a lot of meaning through emotion. So if you change the tone of your voice, then the meaning of your sentence can change as well. So for example, very simply, how are you versus how are you, and versus how are you. It just tells you whether I'm happy to see you or I'm not happy to see you or I'm indifferent, right? So that's all very important. So and then today, most commercial conversational AI systems have this component of empathy, because we need to engage the user. The systems need to engage the user and need to help users better. So without understanding user emotion and sentiment, this cannot be done to our satisfaction. So all systems have empathetic or empathy modules today, and we continue to make the conversational AI systems better. There are also two kinds of conversational AI systems. One is with a voice, computer voice, and the others is just merely you can type like a chatbot, right? These are all considered conversational AI systems. And then within these systems, some will help you complete a task, and that's called task-oriented systems. And others just want to just aims to chat with you, engage you, and make you happy, companion as a companion, and so on. And those are what we call open domain chatbots. Moving forward, a lot of systems are hybrids, has both the function of helping you with some tasks and chatting with you to engage you. So that's the current state of conversational AI system applications. So there are many, many different applications in different areas.
So a lot of your work obviously has been focused on building these intelligent systems to understand and empathize with humans that you just spoke to, a feature which is even difficult between humans, to understand the different meanings we attach to what we say. The author and historian Yuval Harari noted some years ago in one of his books that with tens of thousands and millions of data points, the algorithm knows us better than we know ourselves. And this was a way for him to caution against training algorithms to try to understand us in this way. Is there a difference in your view between knowing and understanding when talking about machine intelligence or coded empathy? And can understanding and empathy, which requires at least a basic level of compassion, be coded in a meaningful way? And I would imagine the ethical issues and related tensions are quite profound in taking this technology forward.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Actually, you pointed out very, very fundamental difference between machines and humans, which is that we can code empathy modules. We can code, emotion recognition and empathy response into computers, into its abilities. But we cannot encode compassion, which has an element of intention, right? So humans, we have empathy when we are compassionate. We want to have that empathy, yeah? Computers, just like when we build machines to vacuum clean, or we build machines to play music for you and so on, we build the functionality, the ability to perform these functionalities into machines. But we cannot build the kind of intentions that humans have. So, and the implication is actually quite profound. when you do not encode intention, because we don't know how, we're not encoding any intention into machines to be empathetic. We're just encoding the function of being empathetic. And this means that we cannot generalize from a machine that seems to be responding empathetically to you to generalize and to think that this machine can form attachment to you. Machines do not attach to you. They just are able to empathize with you and perform tasks for you, but it doesn't mean that they therefore will attach to you. You know, when humans have empathy for each other, we do get attached to each other. And that is a fundamental difference between machines and humans. Ethical implications can be many. You're very, very right in pointing this out. And we must also think about these implications. For example, if we provide a robot companion to a patient, an elderly patient, say, to keep the elderly patient entertained and to have mental health exercise daily. And because such companions can be empathetic, as I mentioned, they can be programmed to be empathetic. The elderlies, of course, will feel more reassured and more engaging with the robot. But there's also the danger of the elderlies getting really too attached to the machine, right? So, for example, I can give you an example. 20 years ago, Sony invented iBot, which is the first robotic pet. And when Sony tried to discontinue these robotic pets, they were met with a lot of complaints and pleas from elderly people in Japan who felt very attached to their robotic dog. And therefore, you know, they begged Sony not to discontinue the product maintenance and support. So Sony then made a second generation or new generation of robotic dogs for these elderly. So there's upside and there's downside of having empathetic machines. You're absolutely right. Therefore, I think that today, as AI researchers and engineers, we can no longer afford to be oblivious to the ethical and societal impact of what we do. I think back to the days when I was building this speech recognition system for fighter jet pilots. We were not very concerned about its application or the ethical implication at the time. But today, we are very aware of it. And in fact, in every conference in AI today, there is ethics committee, there's ethical review of your papers, and researchers are being asked to make ethical statements of the implication of their work. We might not know accurately what the implication is going to be, but we need to think of it and we need to be mindful of what we do.
That's very interesting what you just said. And there's certainly been a lot of focus on deep learning. And I've heard you state on a few occasions that deep learning is merely a new term for something that has been around for a long time. There is a need, I think, to focus on the various approaches in machine learning, which is too often being used interchangeably. Yet it is important to understand the difference between them, because what approach you choose is very important to what solution or to what task that you're actually deploying it towards and what outcome you expect to have, and also as a means of assessing its impact. And in trying to wrap our minds around this, it strikes me that it would also be important to address what we mean by the concept of understanding. And the late Thich Nhat Hanh, the Zen Buddhist monk that passed away early this year, had a very interesting notion of this concept of understanding. He speaks about understanding as a means to throw away our knowledge, to throw away our preconceived ideas about the others. And often, when we don't understand the other, when we're not able to empathize, to show compassion, even if you make the distinction between empathy and compassion, it originates from not knowing ourselves well enough. And true understanding, according to Thich Nhat Hanh, it is only then you can actually demonstrate care and love for the other person, to practice what he calls compassionate listening, which I think is also very important when we think about how to translate that into computational models. And when it comes to this issue of understanding, it thus stands to reason that we cannot just be basing ourselves on data, because if understanding means that we have to be able to be willing to throw away our knowledge, we need to also be willing to question whether the data used in training these large computational models actually gives us the full and whole picture of what it means to be human.
So first of all, let me answer from a personal point of view. I agree with this notion and this definition of understanding as a human being. I agree with it strongly and deeply. I think I've gained new understanding of myself during the last couple of years of COVID and relative isolation and being stuck in one location all the time. I've had a lot of time to reach inside myself, to understand myself better and to understand my fellow human beings through. So it's like, I would say it's like an iterative process, right? Or it's more like a symbiotic process, understanding myself through understanding others through understanding oneself. And actually, this is something that I feel deeply, I feel strongly about. This is something that I feel strongly about, and I think that is deeply, deeply human. I do want to make a distinction between this type of retrospective and deep inner understanding that humans possess. In other words, if I don't talk to you, and I'm not talking to anybody, I'm just by myself, isolated, meditating, I'm still understanding myself, right? But when a machine is not doing anything, there's no such thing as understanding of any kind when a machine is not doing anything. So there's a big difference between what humans consider understanding and what we call understanding in machines. The field of artificial intelligence, starting with its name, artificial intelligence, unfortunately uses a lot of terminology that is very, that's taken from humanities and philosophy, right? So it can be ambiguous. When we say intelligence in machines, we do not mean the same intelligence as humans. When we say learning in machines, we do not mean the same kind of learning process as in humans. We strive for that human level performance. We're not sure we'll ever reach there because there might be a fundamental difference between the kind of understanding that humans possess and the kind of understanding that we endow machines with. So to make that distinction upfront. Now, after that, so when we then build systems to learn, we're actually basically giving lots of data to systems and tell the system to basically mimic the output given input. So a lot of people call this a black box process. It's a connected network, so it's called neural network. Deep learning is actually another name for neural network architecture. It's a connected network of different mathematical formula and mathematical models. And so they learn from lots of examples of input and output. For example, machine translation learns from a lot of examples of translated sentence pairs, source sentence, the target sentence. It just learns. And the way it learns is not through, you're right, deep learning is, the way deep learning learns is not through explicit rule-based learning or symbolic learning. It's not learning the grammar of English or the grammar of French and before it does the translation. It's just looking at a lot of examples of mapping between English and French and learns it, I would say, almost like how a child learns a language. So I've learned different languages in my lifetime, and some of them I learned without explicitly, learning the rules, as a child. My native languages, my 3 native Chinese languages, and then some others I learned through going to school, maybe for 1 month or 2 months, and then just learn from, practicing it with people. So even humans, we have two kinds of ways of thinking, analyzing things, and learning. One is more reflexive, intuitive. The other is more deliberate. So there's this theory of our cognitive system being, having two kinds of systems, the system 1 and the system 2. System 1 is more intuitive, reflexive. System 2 is more deliberate, and we need to learn to do certain things. Certain things we learn very fast.
You're referring to Kahneman's research.
Right. That's in cognitive science. Yes.
Yes.
So the new line of research in natural language processing and conversational AI is indeed about system 1, system 2 thinking. So of course, we're just doing this with machines. So we simplify greatly what we understand about humans into what we consider as system 1 thinking and system 2 thinking. So, so there's a hope that we will combine statistical machine learning, deep learning with symbolic learning in a way that's efficient, and that can be the next way forward. Can be the next way forward. But more important than that, we humans are able to learn in the multimodal environment. So when I learned a language, I did not just learn it from books or reading, doing language exercises, right? I learned it by living it. I learned the languages by going to that country or living in that country. And for me, personally, that's almost the only way I can really learn. I cannot really learn language from textbooks. So why is that, right? I need to, when you learn a language, you live it. We hear this all the time. You have all this context, which helps you learn. So it's not just word by word, but like all the physical environment, all the gestures people make when they are saying certain things, the emotion of the emotion they convey in the things they say. Before I learned a language completely, I remember going through stages where I half understand some language and I can deduce the rest, right, from the context and from the emotion people are using. And machines do that too. Our algorithms do the same thing. It learns certain contexts and then learns other things from these contexts iteratively. I continue to learn new languages because learning language is just fun for me. And I love the process of learning a new language. And I love the outcome, of course, even more when I have learned a new language. It gives me great joy to be able to converse with a taxi driver in Mumbai, just to tell him where I want to go and chat a little bit using the limited Hindi I learned. It's just, I feel that this is something, it's a great gift of human intelligence, right? We are the only species that have language. And that's the most direct way we use to represent our knowledge, our intelligence, our emotions, and the rest.
Those are very interesting perspectives. Now, Pascale, you have stated in a few articles and a few speeches I've heard you give that AI have a gender problem. Can you elaborate on this for our listeners?
Yes, indeed. I was a science fiction fan as a little girl and growing up. I remain a science fiction fan. And I was surprised when I encountered people in computer science who told me they had no interest in science fiction. And that just struck me, because that was my world. Like, of course you want to build machines, robots, because you love science fiction. But there are people who don't like science fiction, and their motivation of doing AI research is totally different from my initial motivation, right? They really just want to help humans and so on. Now, and then I realized, like in a lot of the science fiction literature, The protagonist is usually male. You know, it's often told from the point of view of a young male protagonist who's, you know, either struggling against the machines, fighting against the machines, or might be a machine himself. And then you have all these fantastic classic science fiction, such as, all the science fiction books written by Philip Dick, and the classic science fiction movie Blade Runner that's based on a science fiction novel. So this kind of culture I was deeply immersed in after my family moved to Hong Kong from China. You know, I mentioned earlier I was in China when I started reading science fiction, but when we moved to Hong Kong, I had never seen like this kind of science fiction before, and I became immediately attracted to it. I became a Trekkie, you know. I love Star Trek. Star Wars, and I became, very immersed in this world. And in this world, there are women, but we are a minority. Most of the people who love science fiction, who are science fiction fans, are male. And then I remember being in secondary school. I went to all girls secondary school. And I was about the only girl who was interested in electronics and computer science. And just by my interest, like I was not thinking of pursuing computer science as a way of making more money or so on. That was not my consideration. It was just, I just was into building cool stuff. And I was in this girls' school, and I was the only girl. Really, I started this electronic club in the girls' school, and I very quickly became the president, secretary, and the only member of the club. But that was the beginning of the real learning of computer science and so on. And then when I went to college, so I went from this all-girls high school to electrical engineering in the United States in college. The first class I went into, I remember, I went to this lecture hall of 200 students. It was almost all male students. So I went from an all girls high school to almost all male major. And that was a quite startling change, but I guess I was oblivious. I remember I chose electrical engineering as a major when I was undergraduate because that was the cool major. That was the hardest major for people to get into. Naturally, people told me, girls don't do electrical engineering. And naturally, of course, I wanted to do it. But in the 80s, computer science as a separate discipline spun off from electrical engineering. So computer science was a new discipline in the 80s, mid 80s. And that was the time when computer science, because it focuses on software, and electrical engineering focused on hardware, computer science was seen as soft. And there were more women in computer science than in electrical engineering. And I kind of like, I want to do hardware. I don't want to do software. But that was also a time when there was the highest representation of women in computer science, around 30%. And this percentage of women has been dropping ever since, right? So what happened in the mid 80s was, if some of your listeners remember, it was the beginning of Apple Computer, Microsoft. So it was like, I think Apple Computer's IPO happened in the mid 80s and was the biggest IPO ever. And the culture of Silicon Valley venture capitalism sort of started then. The whiz kid who started usually it's a he, startup, tech startup with his buddy, usually another he, in the garage. That kind of story started then with Bill Gates and Steve Jobs with their partners and so on. So that was the beginning of the Silicon Valley culture of male founders of computer science-based startups, tech companies. So today we see a lot of these companies becoming the most valuable companies in the world. And then following the 80s, we had this internet boom in the late 90s, early 2000s. And again, we saw these male founders of tech companies, internet companies then, that became who became very, very successful. You've got your Jack Ma, Elon Musk, and Jeff Bezos from this generation of founders. So the story of computer science then became more male-centric because of these founders are all male, and the VCs who funded them are also male. It became a cycle because investors would choose to bet on people that they think can replicate the success of the other founders. So from their point of view, they want to take the least risk and the most success, right? So it's understandable that they look for the next Steve Jobs, the next Bill Gates. And that cycle of male-centric computer science started then, and it continues today. So in AI, the same story happened. When we had more success with AI commercialization of AI products, of language products, before in the field of computational linguistics, there was also a higher representation of women there. But once something became lucrative, it became money-making, or even more than that, then the boys come in. All right, because then more men come in. It's not like there are fewer women, it's just there are more men. And a lot of the machines we make are female. So, and in fact, that is not far from the truth. A lot of machines we make, a lot of human form androids, we call androids or human form robots people make, such as the famous Sophia by Hanson Robotics and the famous Erica from Ishiguro, Professor Ishiguro in Japan. They're both female, right? And because, I think it's, and when I make our machines, our agents, our conversational agents, I remember the first one had the name, we gave it a name Zara, and it went on, we have Nora, and they were female form as well. And that's another side of the gender issue in AI. So we tend to pick female form when we build assistants or companions and so on, robots. And then the other side of robotics, people who are building like the Boston Dynamic kind of robots that can carry loads and jump over obstacles and can go to dangerous places and detonate a bomb. Those robots people build tend not to have any facial features or facial expressions, and they tend to take the very muscular physical form, which is not actually needed for its performance or function. It's just this kind of gendered robotic roles. You have these female social robots that have empathy and talks to you and so on, and then have this very muscular looking robots with no head, no face, and performs physical chores. So that is also, and I think it is heavily influenced by science fiction. I myself, I can say that I'm heavily influenced by science fiction, right? So, and then science fiction in turn is influenced by what we build. So it's a symbiotic process, science and science fiction. I used to tell people science fiction and science have nothing to do with each other. Today, I must admit it's not true. We do influence each other. These two fields, we do influence each other a great deal. In my own field of computational linguistics, over the last 30 years, I just see when I go to conferences every year, there are more and more men. There are not fewer women. There are also more women than before. It's just there are more men than ever. So the percentage just skew to more men. With the recent proliferation of AI applications, however, I do see a promising trend of more women PhD students coming into AI, because now these young women see, I hope, and they tell me they do see that there's direct impact of AI, of the technology we build, to the society. Before AI or computer science was seen something like a game you play in your labs. I remember other students complaining to computer science PhD students that we were just playing games. Our research seemed like games. When I was talking about building systems that could talk to you, they say, well, you're just playing, right? But today, these systems actually have impact to society, to healthcare, to financial industry, to every industry. So I think because of that, more young women become interested in AI and computer science. So I do see a recent trend of more young women coming into the field. And I hope that trend continues. There are also more men coming into this field, but I do see the promising trend that there are more women coming into our field now.
We need to make sure that it becomes a safe space to thrive and to build careers for themselves in this space.
Yes, we need to. So the major professional societies and major professional conferences today would tend, in our area, in AI, tend to have this, diversity inclusion aspects of it to make sure and we can, it's not just about the women, right? But also underrepresented groups of people in research. So today we have the AI superpowers, the United States and China, and EU as a bloc is also a AI major player in AI research and development. But what about other countries in the world, right? So we also have underrepresented groups and countries. So there's a inequality, right? AI inequality, and we hope that does not translate into more inequality in the society. So that's also a very important issue we need to work on and to improve. So from women to other underrepresented groups, we need to give them safe space and encouraging space. And also we need to give them resources, right? When I was in the girls' school, we actually didn't have computer science for the high school girls, but there was computer science for high school boys at the time. Today in my girls' school, in my daughter's school, both boys and girls can study computer science. So that is great, right? We should give equal opportunity to everyone. So that is a good change and a necessary change for us to see more representation in computer science and AI.
I know this is something that you've been thinking deeply about, and also cautioning against these type of technology deterministic narratives that sometimes disempowers people to engage with the ethical challenges some of these technologies and scientific breakthroughs represent. Do we understand what makes us humans sentient? Is it just a combination of our sensory perception and the thinking process, or is there more to it?
I mentioned earlier that there's a fundamental difference between humans and machines, no matter how machines seem to behave more and more human-like, right? Because I think it's the ability to question our own existence and to want to understand more who we are, where we came from. That's fundamentally human. I don't see any future where machines would start doing that. I don't even know how to encode that into machines. Where do we have that? Why do we have that, and how do we have that? We don't know how to encode that into machines. So that is fundamentally different. Again, machines can have the ability, the functionality of performing certain tasks. Even empathy in machines is a task it's performing, right? It's a functionality that it needs in order to complete a task, right? It does not come from its good heart because it doesn't have a heart. I know that people who say, who call machines with empathy, machines with heart, but that's just a metaphor. It's not the reality, right? So there's a fundamental difference between intention that humans have, our introspection, our questioning, and our compassion and so on. All that we don't have. Machines don't have. We do not have ability to encode that into machines yet.
Pascale, in a recent article, you asked a very important question, which has been on everyone's mind, and you alluded to this earlier as well. And the name of the article was, Can China and Europe Find Common Ground on AI Ethics? And I guess we could also widen that to also include other continents and other countries investing in AI research. Can there be common ground? And if so, what should and could that look like in your view? And I know you've been thinking a lot about the cultural differences between different regions as they're developing AI, values that are being embedded.
Right. Yeah, indeed. So different societies have had different views about robots and AI. So there were studies done and have shown that in Asia, people tend to be more accepting of AI and robotics. We tend to view robotics AI as being helpful, and my own personal experience is directly linked to that. When I was reading science fictions as a child, the robots we read about as a child they were always friendly robots. They're fun, they help you do different chores and so on. Whereas in the West, there's also this separate tradition of cyberpunk, dystopian science fiction genre, which is very, I'm also very, very attracted by it. So the one I mentioned, Blade Runner, presented a very bleak future of repressive machines and rebellious humans, right? So that vision, that dystopian vision of machines and technology, not just robots, but machines and high tech in general, and government in general, is a view that has been quite prevalent in Western literature and media. So it's natural that people in the West, if they grow up with that kind of representation of our future, will be influenced by it. They will be more wary of AI's potential to do harm to us. Whereas in the East, in China, in Japan, and South Korea, and these countries where we grew up with machines helping us, and machines as a means of elevating the entire society to become better developed and to go from developing country to developed country, right? So in Asia, machines and automation has always been seen as a tool of importance and a tool of social good, right? Today, a lot of Asians have lived and educated have lived and have been educated in the West, somebody like myself, right? And then others in the West have also been adopting a lot of Eastern culture, Eastern philosophical thinking, right? Buddhism and so on. A lot of people are familiar with a different way of looking at the world. So I do see there's mutual influence and things are not so binary. So if you look at the EU and Chinese guidelines on ethical principles for AI development, there are a lot of commonalities. And Chinese study what comes out of the EU very, very closely, and does follow it a lot, I would say, influenced by the EU principles a lot. You know what? Because actually, Chinese engineers and Chinese AI engineers included, and the Chinese leadership, the entire central government, Chinese leadership, they were trained as engineers. And what is engineering? Engineering is a Western invention, right? It's based on science, and science came from the scientific revolution, from the Enlightenment era, right? So the whole thing, the paradigm of scientific thinking, scientific approach, and engineering is Western in a way. And people from China or from Japan or from rest of the world who are trained in these disciplines have surprisingly similar background as those who are trained in the US and anywhere else. So there's actually a very common language between scientists around the world, people who make AIs around. We might not have the same philosophical language from our own culture, but we certainly share a common scientific language. which shapes the way we do science and shapes the way we carry out research and how we make AI products. So the world of AI and AI making is way more unified than people think. Research is shared commonly between, there's a free flow of ideas through publications. One idea that came out in one place in the world, if it's a good idea, it gets picked up very quickly by people in other countries and so on. So the research and development of AI is a very, very unified international effort, global effort. Well, very much like the effort to find vaccines for COVID-19, right? Scientists around the world worked together and they worked on each other's discovery. And they communicated with each other. They used DNA sequencing of the virus that was published by Chinese scientists and that was used by scientists in other places of the world to come up with the mRNA vaccines and so on. So science and the science of AI and the making of AI technology is very global and very cooperative already.
And does it surprise you, given what you just said, that there's such a language of competition, geostrategic competition more specifically, and also a national competition in how we speak about AI?
Yes, but this phenomenon is only on the political side, on the political, geopolitical, and economic side, not at all in the scientific community, right? It's not at all in the scientific community. And before AI became an important technology of economic growth, nobody talked about AI in a competitive manner either, right? And but it has become such an important technology, very much like nuclear technology, maybe in the 60s and 70s, right? The technology itself has no politics, has no political meaning, but the application of technology in the governance, in the economic growth, in the defense of a country is invariably linked to its politics. And therefore, I'm not surprised to see the language of competitiveness, the language of competition, really, and even the language of arms race of AI being used in the public sphere today. But I can assure you, it is far, far from the reality of how we do AI research and development. It's not at all like that. And I do feel sad and a little disappointed that the technology that we work on with the hope of benefiting the whole human society, the entire world, it can be and perhaps could be used to as a political tool and as a tool to drive countries further from each other. And I do not hope to see that. And I hope that AI technologists like myself, like my colleagues, we can also, through what we do, but also through our advocacy, to bring a message of peace building with AI and not the other way.
So it brings me to
your specialty.
Yes. I've heard you say, Pascale, that as the technology matures, and which it has definitely done in recent years, we now need to worry much more about how it affects society in both beneficial and adverse ways. And you yourself have been a tireless champion to ensure that ethical considerations in both the development and deployment of AI is taken seriously. And in this context, you have called for global governance frameworks. And I think for anyone who's been working in the space of creating, global frameworks or bringing people onto the same sheet of music, to put it that way, to have shared regulations, there also needs to be a shared realization about their societal implications. And you just referred to that as well in what you just said about the different landscapes, and that the language of division, the language of competition was not one that resonates with the scientific community. in the same way as it sort of manifests itself in the political discourse. Are we making headway on this? Do you think we can come to a stage where we have a shared understanding, a shared realization, or are we, with the plethora of principles and good efforts that seem to have very little focus on implementation, are we at risk of failing at the ethics of AI in your view?
So I would say maybe a few years ago, right, around 2017, since then, there have been, like you said, a plethora of documents published on ethical principles in AI. But I think we have now entered a stage where we are seeing operationalization of these ethical principles in companies, right? So, some of these things have become more concrete. Some of these principles have become concrete regulations and laws. There's GDPR in EU, and recently the Chinese government issued directive on internet companies to, with very clear guidance on how they can implement recommendation engines in their systems, to give users a choice of turning off recommendation engines, which is quite an extreme measure. So, so now we do see more operationalization and more realization of these ethical principles, and they're becoming laws. And as we understand them better, as we try different ways of implementing these principles, we should be seeing more more of a implementation stage rather than just discussions. But then the technology evolution doesn't stop. A lot of things we discuss, a lot of the regulations and laws today, for example, the aforementioned, the one I just mentioned about recommendation engines, that's very specifically tailored towards what exists today. But as AI technologies move forward, we will need to continue to have this kind of a public discussion, debate, discourse, and continue to iterate the ethical guidelines. Just like for bioethics, right? With the new technology, there will be new bioethics guidelines. The same thing for AI. As technologies improve and evolve, we need to have new discussions, new topics, new guidelines, and it's gonna be an ongoing and iterative process, right? The technology does not stop evolving.
Which is a nice segue. You mentioned the bioethics, and some would argue that we have only scratched the surface of the transformative impact and potential of AI, especially as it is being utilized much more for medical research, obviously not without its ethical challenges with regards to privacy and safety and security. And Pascale, you have a very personal story that guided your interest in applying your skills to medical research. I was wondering if you can share more of that with our listeners, and also your views on AI for medical research more generally.
Sure. So yeah, I mentioned my interest in AI came from my love of science fiction and robots, kind of like a child's interest, right, of building something fun and cool, and no more than that. And then my interest in mathematics and then later on statistical modeling made me do more research into the particular methodology we can use in machine learning and so on. That was also out of personal interest and a love of mathematics and the love of making something that has a scientific support with scientific methods. So that was my approach to what I did and my research for decades. Until 2015, I was diagnosed with cancer. And it was very quickly, when I was diagnosed, I had to be hospitalized, and I went through surgeries and 3 surgeries, and then I recovered. throughout that process, from diagnosis to post-surgery, then I had to go through different kind of treatment plans. My doctor, my oncologist, who is also himself a researcher, share research papers with me, knowing that I am also a researcher. So I took an interest in my own cancer, as if it's a scientific project, right? It became a research project. So I read tons of research papers on different types of cancer in my specific type of cancer, different treatment plans, and whether we should use this treatment or that treatment based on the published scientific findings and so on. And I am very well today. I realized that other people's research saved life, and they continue to save the lives of millions of people around the world. And then I had this crisis, right? My existentialist crisis in my own work. Other people's research saved lives. I was just building something I thought was cool. And that became abundantly clear to me it was not enough. That I needed to have a new purpose for my life, my new life that was saved by other people's research. And I started questioning about everything I was doing and whether I was doing it for a purpose and how I should live my life. So long story short, I decided with my oncologist, we talked about what I did, and he said, actually, you know what? Machine learning can help us with cancer diagnosis and cancer treatment. And I jumped on it. I'm like, of course, this is what I should do. This is my purpose, right? This is what I can do to help other human beings and help a little bit in saving other people's lives. So healthcare, how to use machine learning to improve healthcare became my passion from that point on. And and before then, I was never even interested in medical school, medical studies and so on. Chinese always want to become medical doctors, but I just wanted to be an engineer that built robots. But from that point on, I realized, this is what I really feel passionate about, which is to use AI to benefit humans and society. And a lot of my colleagues share the same passion. And that gives us a lot of, that has given us a newfound purpose in what we do, and I think today, a lot of us feel energized by this purpose and this mission. And healthcare research, both physical health and mental health. Indeed, today, there are a lot of, startups and the researchers are using AI and machine learning to improve healthcare. Now, my one big passion remains to be early diagnosis of cancer and cancer treatment plans using machine learning. And only recently, this has been met with a huge challenge, which is, database. Listeners probably all know by now that for machine learning to work well, it needs a lot of data to learn from. But patient data is something that's very fragmented and very well guarded. So we don't have a homogeneous database of hundreds and thousands, let alone millions of cancer patients of one single patient cancer type to train our AI systems. So that remains a very big challenge. But today there's some research in new kind of machine learning that will preserve patient privacy. For example, something called federated learning that attempt to solve this challenge. So I'm hopeful that we will get there with cancer treatment, precision medicine with machine learning. Before we reach there, I started working with life scientists in my university. Our group and another group of life scientists have been collaborating on using actually indeed cancer patient data to basically right now to predict hospital hospital planning and to predict re-emission likelihood and so on. Not quite to the point where we can say, okay, given your history, you're likely to get such cancer, and therefore you need to do this. Not there yet, but I'm hopeful. I hope that's what we can do. Cancer kills so many people unnecessarily. I have gone through it. I got the best care that's possible. I went through this research stage with my, the world leading research scientists, oncologists together to find the best way to cure, to cure my cancer without incurring a huge cost, physical cost to my body, and I understood that nobody needs to die from cancer. If we can diagnose it early and we can treat it with the appropriate treatment, nobody needs to die from cancer. And that's a big revelation to me. And I will spend the rest of my life pursuing that goal, working with medical professionals, hoping to help in that direction.
That's a very reassuring message to those that are listening, that are either impacted by or know someone who's impacted by cancer. And thank you so much for sharing that story, Pascale. And I'm so happy to hear that you're doing well now, you're fully recovered, but also taking that experience and, as you said, combining it with all of your expertise in the AI field, and trying to now to put it into good use to help others. Just to shift back a little bit to sort of your core domain, which is that around linguistics and language models. Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of focus lately on the toxicity of some of these language models that are being developed and put into use. Are you worried about what you're seeing right now, where we're attributing all of these capabilities to these rather rudimentary language models, obviously for purposes of advertising and generating some hype around to attract venture capitalists, etc.? Is it just a PR hype? Where are we heading with these language models in your view?
I would say regarding these large language models, the hype is both false and true, in the sense that people both underestimate and overestimate these language models at the same time. How is that possible? So that is, again, coming back to the function versus intention. So today's large language models are indeed very, very powerful, beyond what we could imagine just a few years ago. They are indeed very, very powerful. And so to the point that we can use them to build any natural language systems that can answer all kinds of questions, that can create novels, that can write scripts, that can write poetry, that can make summaries, that can program, that can actually program, actually can write programming, and all kinds of things. It is indeed very, very powerful, and it is. We have not seen the limit to its capabilities yet. So that's one message, which is it is indeed very, very powerful. It's probably more powerful than what we see today as these language models become bigger. And because of that, there is a great ethical impact of these language models, in that they behave so human-like that they can do things. They can indeed generate text that's harmful and so on. And they can be abused and misused and so on. So those dangerous risks are real. And we need to actively, immediately build algorithms to control these language models, to filter its output, to guard, to mitigate the potential harms. So this is what we actively are working on today. And I'm appealing to the whole field, to the entire NLP community, to work on these algorithms, right? To control these large scale language models. Yes, on one hand, it is true, the risk is very real, and we need to mitigate these risks. On the other hand, as I said, we can control them. We are building algorithms to control algorithms, so to speak. And because they are human built, right? They're built by humans. These language models did not drop to us from some alien being. So we built them. We can control them. So that's another message. So and I think and we built them. We better control them, right? So that's what we're actively working.
It's interesting what you say, because increasingly we see that there is a tendency towards almost removing the human from the story, as opposed to reiterating what you just said. The story of AI is fundamentally a human one. It's choices we make, it's decision we make. It is our choices of applying it in a certain way. And yet we sort of buying into this more deterministic, technological deterministic narrative, is that this is beyond our control, which is extremely damaging for any ethical oversight.
Right. I think this trend or this narrative of giving machine agency, right? It's a narrative where machines have somehow become this way, and the machine is going to have agency to do this harm and do that harm. Just because they appear to have human-like performances does not mean they have agency, right? We still have human agency. We are the ones who build technologies. We are the ones who will build the controls over them. And because I'm a fan of science fiction. In science fiction, machines have agency, because that's a fun part of science fiction, right? These machines come out and they have agency. But in the reality, in science, machines don't have agency. And therefore, we need to modify the public discourse and the popular narrative from a science fictional one of machine agency to the realistic one of human agency, right? We build these machines, we control these machines, we can decide what to build and what not to build. And we can decide to build safeguards and mitigations and locks and metaphorically speaking, we can decide what to build, and we can decide how to control what we build, right? So just like we have cars everywhere. Nobody thinks of these cars having agency, right? Because humans will be driving them. Even though some cars have become almost automatic, still, we don't think of cars of having agency. But imagine somebody from the 16th century, if they see cars running around today, they will be scared to think that these cars are some kind of magical beings, right? So no, if we can, in the scientific community, can continue to demystify what we build, the algorithms and so on for the public, I think we can change narrative from that of machine agency to human agency again.
And do you feel that we are sufficiently ready and able to have discussions around the limitations that these systems present? So not just the risk, but also the limitations of functionality as we are continuing to deploy rather immature systems into our daily lives, and which of course comes at a price.
I think you are spot on that need. So today, whenever we get medicine, right, from drugs, from any store or whatever, it comes with a disclaimer, of side effects. It always tells you the side effects. We need to do the same with AI and with robots, right? We need to have a explainable, we need to explain the limitations, potential harms, just like drugs, side effects, potential just side effects of what we build and what we are using, so that users are aware of it, mindful of it, and that they can decide whether to use it or not, right? So this is something we need to do in AI and robotics, which is to explain the benefits, but also the limitations of what we are putting in people's hands and putting in people's homes and workplaces. So I would like to see smart speakers to come with explanation that how you should turn it off if you don't want to be when the speaker is listening to you, when it's not listening to you. We need to have more explanations of that kind of the things that we put in people's hands and homes and lives and work.
And as someone who actually builds these systems, it begs the question, can you safely interrupt these systems once they've been deployed and embedded?
So the responsible thing to do is to give user agency to disrupt it. So recent development where Chinese government mandates internet companies or AI companies to allow user to turn off recommendation, right? That was not, it's possible. We just didn't think of building that before. And now you must do that. So yes, it's possible. It's possible. We just have to, we need more guidelines into, this so-called ethically aligned design principles, right? When you design these products, what are the things you need to follow? So it is the path towards more operationalization of responsible AI, right? And it's coming, and we are slowly and surely taking the steps to ensure safety for the users of AI products and systems.
And you mentioned early in our conversation that when embedded into more military applications, where it might be part of a much bigger systemic response, question is it possible in the same way?
So first of all, I think it is always possible. Secondly is that it is actually less of a technology issue, more of a governance issue. So I'm happy that you brought up the military application of AI. I think it's a very good example or case study to illustrate this point of governance versus technology development. So I was actually on the panel at the United Nations on the with facing all the ambassadors from 200 different countries on the discussion on lethal autonomous weapons, right? And turns out military application of AI, like military application of any technology, falls under the purview of the Geneva Convention. So it's a case where people design the governance of weaponry, any new weapon that could potentially come into place many decades ago. They have the Geneva Convention, they have various clauses governing and how weapons should be used, how they can be used, when they should be used, and when they should not be used, and so on. So that applies to any weapon, including lethal autonomous weapons. So there you have fortuitously an existing governance structure already. And then it's a matter of mapping AI technology to follow this governance, follow the Geneva Convention, right? It is, in my view, actually a more developed field than many other industry applications of AI in terms of governance, because there is a very strict agreement, and also it's Geneva Convention. So actually it's a very good model for AI governance. Now, from there, you then map to how you should build automation into weapon systems, and how you should have human in the loop, or you have human control, and where you can allow for some degree of automation and autonomous decisions made by machines, right? Following Geneva Convention. Of course, the whole story is not that simple, but still, it's a very good case of where technology follows the governance, right? So I wish we had that already in every industry. So let's talk about the health industry again. So for any drug to get approval, there's a established due process, right? There's approval agency and so on. And for any medical professional to practice medicine, they have to be certified and recognized and so on. So it's also a heavily regulated industry, the health industry. And the application of AI there also has to follow the regulations of that particular health industry. And what I mentioned about the challenge of getting data from patients is exactly a reflection of a strong governance in that industry, right? It's not some industry where everything goes, anything goes. You cannot apply AI just because you want to, and you can. You cannot. It's governed. And also, deep learning algorithms cannot be used in many of the diagnostical situations because if they are not explainable, the doctors will not accept them, right? So it is another case where the governance comes before technology development, right? It's not that we cannot do it, but governance comes first. So regulations come first. Explainability comes first. So this is another industry where there's this interplay of governance and technology. So, my view is maybe not the same as a lot of the authors of the papers you mentioned. I think technologists and the policymakers and so on can work together, as they have worked together in the weapons industry, in regulating weaponry, in regulating drugs and medicines, in regulating health industry. It can be done in any industry. I think even in financial industry, there's heavy regulation on what can be done and not done using technology or without technology, right? So it's like it's an industry dependent regulation. Now there are areas, for example, the internet industry. I don't know what you call them, like the new economy industry, the new internet industry, right? This is because they're so new. There's little governance. The governance. This is where the industry develops so rapidly before any governance is set to place. So that's why you see governments everywhere in the world catching up to the internet companies. They are issuing regulation after the fact, right? The regulation on recommendation engine and so on. And many times, and oftentimes, to come up with these regulations, they need to involve the people who actually built the systems to write the regulation, right? So this is a particular industry where the development was so rapid that the regulation is like now catching up, data privacy and so on. So I think that's the area where people are more concerned because it just internet industry just developed and so rapidly that but we are slowing down. We're not slowing down the technological innovation in the internet industry, but we are being more responsible, being more mindful. So I'm again optimistic. There are problems, there are issues and challenges, but we can solve them. We can meet these challenges. We can work together and make things better.
So Pascale, I know that art is very important to you. And you said in your introduction that you grew up with parents that were very dedicated to arts. How has that impacted on your work and your interaction with these technologies that do take form of artwork sometimes?
Yes, I think from my background, my parents are professional artists, and from my love of science fiction, you can probably deduce that I love art. I'm an art lover, and I believe in the power of art in pushing the envelope of human development, just like sports, just like the Olympic Games you're witnessing. They represent the aspiration of humans, right? Art is the manifestation of human aspiration as well. Now, I have hope in using art to push the development of AI, actually. So a lot of people have talked about using AI as tools for artists. For example, AI can generate paintings now. Artists can use AI to compose music and so on. So that goes without saying. That's very obvious. AI can be used as tools for artists, just as it can be used as tools for other industries, right? But my hope is to see AI to push but my hope is to see art in pushing innovation in AI. As an example, me and my students, we work on natural language generation. And in natural language generation, one application we can use it for is to generate script novels. I also touched upon that earlier. And recently, I actually collaborated with a famous artist in China. His name is Xu Bing, a concept conceptual artist and artists of everything, who does great work. We recently collaborated and made the world's first fully automatic AI film, which generates scripts automatically, and then the system then goes into the archive of recent news clips and social media clips and surveillance clips, and generates the images that correspond to this automatically generated script. So it makes a first movie that is both infinite and without any human director, producer, actor, composer, and so on. So why do we want to do that? Because we want to see how we can push this this technology, right, to create something that has never been created before. And throughout this collaboration, we actually had to come up with new algorithms of natural language generation. So this is a very good example of art pushing technology versus technology pushing art. So I am a big proponent of using art to push where we can go. I don't want to say it's to develop the technology. It's not. It's to develop simultaneously the art and the technology. In this case, the technology is the art, and the art is the technology. It's not two separate disciplines. It's not two separate components. It's one, and that is something I'm passionate about recently as well.
I guess it goes back to where we started off, right? How do you teach empathy? How do you teach a machine to interpret complex human emotions such as humor and other things, which requires a level of creativity? And there's been a lot of discussions whether an AI can ever be creative, or even do we want an AI to be creative? But what you're saying is that you can use art, maybe not to give it attributes of being creative or being conscious or giving it agency, but simply using art as one means and method of teaching it about empathy.
That is very interesting. I didn't think about it that way. Actually, these large language models have become quite creative. I mentioned that they can be prompted to program by itself. They can be prompted to create scripts, as I just mentioned, automatically from scratch. The scripts don't look like normal scripts yet. They have, it's the first generation of AI scripts, right? So they are kind of, imagine the silent films we had at the beginning of filmmaking, right? They are still very, very primitive. But one day they will become very, very good. And they are very creative. But again, they are creative because we humans made them so, right? The agency is still ultimately human agency. We make them we make them creative. So philosophically, yes, AI can be creative, but still they are not the ones who decide to be creative, right? That's still controlled by humans.
It's a artistic representation of who we are.
Indeed, indeed. I think the term should be, I know there are terms like combining technology philosophy, they call it techno philosophy. I have not seen a term. Maybe it's time to come up with a term for that. Techno art or AI art. We call it AI art, which is both AI and art. So AI art is this new form of art that's coming into place. Just like previous generations of media art, digital art, photography, print art that had become new forms of art. AI art will become and is becoming a new form of art.
So my last question for you, Pascale, is one that I've asked several of other guests as well on this podcast, which is, as someone who's definitely been for many years now at the vanguard of change in the AI research domain, what will be your advice to those grappling with ethical dilemmas or even navigating their professional journeys?
I think what I would tell the younger version of myself is to find meaning in what I do. science fiction will remain inspiration for me. I continue to be inspired by science fiction and philosophy. I didn't talk about philosophy, but actually I read a lot of philosophy, and I learn from it, philosophers. So I think passion without meaning can lead to disaster, right? And passion without meaning can lead to failures. So for young people who are either doing AI startups or trying to pursue a career in AI, I would advise to find meaning in what you do. Why do you want to do that? Because it can be anything. It can be, I want to save other people's lives. It can be, I want to, cure cancer, or it can be pushing the limit of something, but to have passion, but also to have a purpose. I think passion without meaning brings a lot of pain. What do I mean by that? I did startups also in the 90s and I know that. And I did it with blind faith and passion. But I was not sure what I was doing it for, other than changing the world. We can change the world for the better, or we can change the world for for worse. So I think if every one of us find the meaning of what we do, hopefully a positive meaning of what we do, if every one of us find the positive meaning in what we do, combined with our passion of doing it, then together we collectively can really change the world for the better. And my God, the world needs to be improved, both from environment, from health crisis we're facing today, from energy, from mental health issues, from politics, and from people's, radicalization of different beliefs and conflicts between different cultures. We really need a lot of help. And if we can find meaning in what we do and use our passion to focus on improving the world better and move the needle in a positive way, then collectively our children will live in a better world, truly a better world than what we live in today. All right. That is my hope. That is my hope. And that is the meaning that I have found in my life, in my work. And that's what drives me and many of my colleagues to work tirelessly and to devote our energy and our passion to do what we do. It's not about publishing a lot of papers. It's not about being recognized as this honor, that honor. It's not about getting paid at this grade or that grade. It really is about how we can make the world a better place. So, and I believe those who strive to make the world a better place, they also succeed in what they do, including startups. And to the investors who are listening, I've also worked with a lot of investors. And I think for you to find the successful startup, you should also ask what's the meaning in what they do. Because if they do have a meaning, then they have true value to the market and to the world. Then they are worth investing because they will succeed. So this is what I want to say at the end. Find meaning in your passion and find meaning in doing AI.
Thank you, Pascale, for sharing your time with us, stories from your outgrowing and deep expertise. This has been a captivating conversation. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in, and a special thanks to the team at the Carnegie Council for hosting and producing this podcast. For the latest content on ethics and international affairs, be sure to follow us on social media at Carnegie Council. My name is Anja Kaspersen, and I hope we earned the privilege of your time. Thank you.